Pokemon Legends ZA. It's quite the controversial title. Really, the whole Pokemon brand seems to have reached Sonic the Hedgehog levels of petty arguments in the fanbase. We get people demonizing anyone who makes any criticisms, valid or otherwise, and people who are the exact opposite, harassing anyone who buys or even so much as shares their interest in the Pokemon games. And then there's people like me, the normal types, who get the games that he knows he'll like, plays it, and acknowledges the flaws, but enjoys it warts and all. And even with the flat walls and questionable designs, making me a water type for how wet I am, I'd say I really enjoyed my time with Legends ZA. The battle system adopting a real-time approach makes Pokemon battles not only more fast-paced, but more difficult. Needed to make more quick decisions with what moves to make at the best time, as well as factoring in the positions of you and your Pokemon. Mixed in with the Legends game's way of making catching Pokemon incredibly fun and addicting, the characters and story are legitimately interesting and well written, and the graphics aren't anything amazing or anything to write home about, but they ain't bad. The performance is pretty good, even on the Switch 1, though the lack of voice acting is still disappointing. It's even more distracting with how some of the cutscenes have very well done mouth animations that look pretty close to the dialogue. Makes me think it was cut late in development. A lot of criticisms I've been seeing with Legends ZA and Pokemon in general are with the graphics and or some of the issues that actually matter, such as Dexit or the performance of Scarlet and Violet at launch. Don't get me wrong, graphics, specifically how a game looks like art directions, are an important element, just nowhere near the most important element when discussing a video game. But with every new Pokemon game, there seems to be some sort of controversy, usually about the graphics, and a lot of fans, usually a very vocal minority, will scream, "We need to vote with our wallets for Pokemon to get better." And then the game comes out, and it does super well because it's Pokemon. This is the Pokemon cycle, and it's been this way since Black and White. When I got more into Pokemon with these games, I remember seeing next to nothing but people calling these games the worst in the franchise. Mostly people who grew up with the actual worst generation, Red and Blue, known as Gen 1ers. They mellowed out these days, and Gen 5 is widely considered the best generation, because it is. But for a franchise that is... hold on, let me get the papers real quick. Almost $150 billion, according to Visual Capitalist. With these numbers, you think these games would look 150 years into the future. Game Freak, more like Game... Meek. Well, I guess Pikachu, your mascot. Slacking looks more fitting for the job. Satoshi Tajiri should commit self-destruct... Okay, that's enough. Let's actually add nuance to the conversation. On February 27, 1996, Game Freak and Nintendo made and published, respectively, Pokemon Red and Green in Japan to a roaring success. Nearly 9 months later, they released Pokemon Blue, just Blue, a revamped re-release of the original versions released as promotional content by the Koro comic. No, I did not have a stroke. But you're about to. This version would be what the international versions, Red and Blue, would be based on, releasing just a few weeks after the English dub of the Pokemon anime in September 28, 1998, more than 1 year after it debuted in Japan. And fun fact, the studio who made the Pokemon anime, Oriental Light and Magic, is the same studio who animated the Berserk anime adaptation from 1997. Back in Japan around this time, the Pokemon Center Company has been formed as a joint venture by Game Freak, Nintendo, and Creatures Inc., who was previously Ape Inc., the development team behind Earthbound. Research is fun. For 2 years, its purpose was to manage the Pokemon Center stores in Japan, but after the release of Gold and Silver, the Pokemon brand had been blowing up, not just in Japan, but mostly everywhere else in the world, with Red and Blue, the anime, and the trading card game now being everywhere. And multiple companies from around the world came to these companies, namely Creatures, with head Tsunekazu Ishihara suggesting the plans to expand the Pokemon Center Company to the Pokemon Company. They just dropped Center from the name, even though they do still manage these stores to this day. So Game Freak makes the mainline games as well as any spin-off not assigned to any third-party developer. Nintendo publishes these games outside of Japan, and Creatures Inc. is in charge of the trading card game, leaving Pokemon Co. with everything else, such as marketing, merchandising, building Pokeparks, as well as giving out budgets and deadlines to projects such as shows, movies, cards, and the thing I forgot this video was about, video games. So 25 years later, Pokemon has the most money and post on Rule 34, and yet the Pokemon games look like they can run on hardware released 25 years ago. So what's going on? Is Game Freak just filled with a bunch of hacks that are so lazy they just reuse and regurgitate already made assets and steal ideas? Oh no. That's Power World.
What did you say? Ninjas!
Game development is inherently a very difficult job, and Game Freak has shown in their passion for the craft is unmistakable. Behind all the Dexits and subpar visuals, the core gameplay, the designs, and exploring the world of Pokemon is still great as it ever was, and more back than it was first released. Say whatever you want about the modern Pokemon games, but what you can't say is the people who make them are just lazy, because that cannot be further from the truth. Throughout this generation, they've shown the drive and ambition that many say they haven't even dared to try for years. We got the Legends games, which their whole thing has been reinventing the wheel with Pokemon and steering away from the mainline games, which has also been growing in more open-ended design, seeing Scarlet and Violet and Sword and Shield kinda laying the groundwork for that with the Wild Zones. But this ambition can only be reached with the proper time and resources, namely manpower. Things Game Freak aren't really given enough of. Throughout most of its history, Game Freak has had under only 100 employees, only growing from little under 100 to little over 200 employees throughout the Switch's lifespan to today. This is because the games Game Freak make, while incredibly polished and bursting with content, are still small scale relative to games made on consoles rather than the handhelds they've been familiar with for decades up until the hybrid console, the Switch, while still underpowered compared to the dedicated home consoles released before and after it, but still a marginal boost from the 3DS, which housed Generation 6 and 7. 6 being X and Y, the first of mainline games to be completely 3D. Goodbye sprites, we all miss you years after almost everyone started wishing Game Freak stopped using you. This likely put a lot of workload on the team, resulting in X and Y feeling a little underbig, with not as much content as Black and White 1 and, strangely enough, no Ultimate Edition or sequel games. Or I guess Legend ZA is a sequel, but I digress. This is where we see Game Freak's small size come to bite them, and it only gets worse from here. Come Sun and Moon in 2016, seen as some of the best games in the series. Having a whole year break from any new releases gave Game Freak enough time to fix X and Y's shortcoming while introducing fresh and new ideas. And with the Nintendo Switch on the horizon, everyone was eager to see a mainline Pokemon game on a console, or half a console, come 2017, and we get Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon for the 3DS. Not the first time this has happened. Black and White 2 came after the 3DS, but at least those games had more than 1 year of development, and were on weaker hardware. Ultra Sun and Moon aren't bad, but not the upgrades the other sequel games were on their originals. But that's most likely because the next year we got another game in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the series debut to the Switch. Listen, okay, we all have those first impressions we aren't proud of. Remakes of the first generation that are both mainline games and spin-offs designed to attract people who got into the series via Pokemon Go. Not at all bad games, they're perfectly fine, and while simple on the surface, they still took a lot to make for Game Freak, who are also in the midst of developing Generation 8, Sword and Shield. And suddenly, the Dexit is making a whole lot more sense to me right now. Around 400 Pokemon could not be transferred into Sword and Shield since the team did not have the time and manpower to transfer their data into the game, this becoming one of the first major controversies for Pokemon in the Switch era. A lot of people started calling Game Freak and Nintendo out for being lazy and greedy, and sure, there are plenty of reasons to not like Nintendo, but outside of publishing Pokemon, they're pretty hands-off with it and Game Freak, which really were doing what they can with the hands they were dealt by the Pokemon Company, who again are the ones who allocate the budget and deadlines. Most don't even know who the Pokemon Company are other than the name on the box art. After Sword and Shield, the Pokemon series was given some sort of downtime. Next year we got 2 DLC expansions in the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. Sure, not full mainline games, but a lot of work still went into these 2 expansions. I'd wager both of them combined come close to Sword and Shield's own dev costs. There's also the fact that these 2 DLC campaigns happen to have released in 2020. You know, the year when nothing bad happened at all. Yeah, COVID-19 messed up a lot of things in the world, and game development was no exception. But whether it's a virus, a fucking meteor, or God himself, nothing is stopping another Pokemon games releasing next year, even if Game Freak wasn't the ones making it. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, remakes of Gen 4 developed by Ilka, released to a very mixed reception due to not doing anything more with the base Gen 4 games than giving them a cute chibi art style and some modern concessions. I enjoyed them as much as I did the original Diamond and Pearl, but they didn't surpass Platinum for me. Ilka has shown in later years they are a very talented studio in their own right, but it's likely the pandemic and some restrictions by the Pokemon Company that forced them to cut down on their vision. Come next year in 2022, Game Freak releases two games. I'm sorry, what? Pokemon Legends Arceus and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Technically 3 games if you want to be that guy. Both really good games at their core, but were held back considerably being developed around the same time. One was a spin-off tied to Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl with an open-world new battle system and an art style that in some areas looks like they could have used more time in the oven. And then Generation 9 was Scarlet and Violet, the most ambitious generation in the franchise. A massive open world with Pokemon rocking pretty detailed looking textures compared to Sword and Shield's more flat, cel-shaded look. More Pokemon, including ones previously cut, as well as online co-op. What do you mean making 2 open world RPGs and releasing them in the same year wasn't a good idea? That'd be hard for any game studio, especially one where at this point likely still had under 200 employees. And I'm not saying a small development team is bad, it definitely has its own advantages over bigger teams as well as disadvantages. Communication is vital in creative projects like video games, and the more cooks in the kitchen, the more messes occur. But feeding a whole village can't be done with a food truck, even if it's the size of a semi and the chefs are Italian. I'm not saying Game Freak needs to have as many employees as Rockstar, not like that's really working in their favor anyway. We don't need a Pokemon game where you can see their testicles shrink in the weather. No game needs that. No shame on the one Rockstar dev who's probably very proud of themselves for getting that in the game, but if Game Freak wants to meet the ambition they set, then they're gonna need more people, or at least more time. These games were likely made in around 2 years. I want to say including the dual developments dividing manpower. It's no wonder they came out looking the way they do despite the gameplay still maintaining their fun quality. But let's not forget, these aren't the only games made by these freaks. The Gear project is a way for the people at Game Freak to work on different projects outside of Pokemon, the first game from this initiative being Harmonite, a rhythm-based 2D platformer, this being the first original product from Game Freak since Pokemon was created. And that wasn't just a one-time thing, they got Pocket Card Jockey, Rambo the Badass Elephant, Giga Wrecker, and Little Town Hero. Their names don't lie, yes, but it does feel like they're naming these after what words come out of the Poga hat. And Game Freak's latest non-Pokemon venture is Beast of Reincarnation, an absolutely stunning action RPG, but the reason this looks so much better than the mainline games is because these games give Game Freak complete creative freedom with no strict as hell deadline, with likely more funding than the Pokemon Company gives Game Freak. It's not that Game Freak doesn't care about Pokemon, it's that they're not given the proper time to fully care for these games before they're pushed out the door, and the hardware they're working with allows them with a lot more room. It's not like they're owned by Nintendo or anything. Before Pokemon, they made a game for the Genesis, Pulseman. This is actually where the move Voltackle came from. I think it's important and really cool that Game Freak has the opportunity to branch out and try new things outside of their flagship franchise. It helps strengthen creativity and learn new things. And even if Beast of Reincarnation is a Concord level failure, it doesn't really matter because Game Freak can just recoup the cost with the next Pokemon game in a week. But this still divides the team at Game Freak by at least a bit, and shown in the recent leaks, the budgets for the Pokemon games released on Switch range between, and get ready, 2 to 3 billion yen, which translates to $13 to $20 million. For AAA game development, that's pretty small. Some AA and B studio games have higher budgets. It's likely these small budgets is the reason Pokopia is using a game keycard for the physical release. Not that I really care, I wasn't going to get it anyway. One, the whole Minecraft-inspired home building genre like Dragon Quest Builders, it isn't really my thing. And two, I don't like being reminded Ditto can transform into a human. Also, if you're wondering why the yen is worth so little, it's because it's a very old currency and it's related to the Japanese government. A lot of inflammation in World War II definitely didn't help. Earlier this year, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 released, and though I've only just started playing it recently, at the same time with Legends EA coincidentally, two games that both have French influence. I'ma cook up some ratatouille, and though I've only played it recently, I gotta agree with the general sentiment. This has got to be one of the best games, not just RPGs, in years, and definitely deserves to win Game of the Year. It's got my vote, though Donkey Kong still has my heart. And I've actually played dozens of RPGs in my lifetime, so that's not just ignorance talking. I hope it wins Game of the Year to send a message to the industry, not just Pokemon Company, we'll get back to them, that a small team with a reasonable budget and a healthy dev time window is enough to make an incredible game that's successful both critically and financially. Similar to Astrobot, except people won't be able to make the Sony rigged arguments this time. Game Freak has the potential to make a game as polished as Expedition 33. The game's budget is unknown, though it's estimated to be around the same as the Pokemon games on Switch, and though many believe it to be so, no, the game was not made by 33 people alone. Sandfall Interactive, the main developers, are made up around 30 people, like the director Guillaume Baruch, previously of Ubisoft, and the rest of the team behind the design. Programming, art, writing, audio, design, etc., but a lot of contact work was required for animation, an orchestra, QA, motion capture, all funded by publisher Kepler. That doesn't downplay the massive accomplishment Expedition 33 is and all of the work everyone put into it, including the dogs. Also found out the main composer Lorien Testard was found on SoundCloud, and some of the developers were found on Reddit posts looking for voice actors. Reddit finally did something good. Game Freak likely has more developers, and the Pokemon Company definitely has more money than Kepler, but without the time and resource management, it won't matter how much money and people you put into a project. It can easily fall short. If you rush your cooking, you'll just end up blowing up the kitchen. Expedition 33 was made in between 5 to 6 years, and it was the only project the team was working on. Around 3 times the dev cycle, with everyone focused on one project. That's why Expedition 33 is of a higher quality than the previous Pokemon games, but not because Game Freak is lazy, it's because they're overworked. Legends EA is definitely one of the best Pokemon games in a while, and that's likely due to the extra dev time Game Freak got for this title. 2054 being the first year without a major Pokemon release since 2015, my god. And even the game still has its hiccups. Again, no voice acting, the game isn't the smoothest on the original Switch, and a lot of the buildings are just flat shapes with nothing inside them. That does bring the game down a few pegs, I'm not gonna lie, but they're not deal breakers. I don't think that warrants a flurry of videos that trash on the game without even giving it a chance, especially videos that use AI in the thumbnail, which in my opinion pretty much invalidates your entire opinion. Well, hopefully I was able to make my point. Game Freak is a talented company filled with people who really do care about what they put out, but company management forces them to cut down on their visions and leave some of the games underdeveloped by not being able to fully focus on just one. And by the looks of the recent leaks, it looks like that isn't stopping, but at least it's slowing down. The next generation, rumored to be named Wind and Raves, are set to be released by 2026. And sure, I'd rather have it be 27, and it may just be. Nothing is set in stone, but even if it is, that is still 4 years after Scarlet and Violet instead of 3 years. And while there's still co-development with the next Legends game, rumored to be Galar focused,
British?
with Gen 10 DLC also being planned,
Rubbish.
and a Gen 5 remake planned somewhere long afterwards,
Rubbish. Big.
I think I can be optimistic and say the worst is behind us. The games are being given more time, even if it's not as much as it should be. I think Pokemon being a bi-yearly franchise will help a lot. It's a step in the right direction though. Game Freak is still hiring. Beast of Reincarnation is set to release next year, which is sure to free up some hands, and the added horsepower in the Switch 2 means it's unlikely we'll get another launch of Scarlet and Violet. I could very easily be wrong, but hey, I'd argue that's better than being a cynical asshole and being right. The 30th anniversary of Pokemon is coming up, and the next Pokemon Direct is close by. And yeah, they're usually just a bunch of announcements that could have just been news posts and then something actually interesting at the end. I understand that some people don't want to support the Pokemon franchise out of a place of genuine passion for the series, and they want these games to come out without being rushed and in their fullest potential, and that's 100% valid. I choose to play these games because I know at the end of the day I'll enjoy them, regardless if it looks as though it came from the 6th generation, because I'm a freak who enjoys RPGs from that era specifically. Why do you think I spent $100 in Skies of Arcadia? But no matter what, I'll always love Pokemon, and I'll say it again. Game Freak isn't lazy, but they are crazy. I mean, just look at Mega Feraligatr. What were they thinking? I mean, imagine the wind resistant. And Mega Starmie, oh my god, those legs go all the way up!